But non-blame environment means non-blame error investigations. And we can call it whatever we want, just culture, we can call it, you know, but when it gets right down to it, it's blame-free error investigations to find out what happened. And then separate from that is if we do have poor performers that require some type of intervention or management, we do that. We do that and get them out of there or in a different situation or educated to be able to do what they want. One of the things we learn about this whole system's contribution to error is that it's reflected by James Reason and the Swiss cheese model. And that whole model represents two things for me. It first just represented how do you model the evolution of an error. So it's layers of Swiss cheese all lined up, representing the defenses that an organization puts in place to guard against something going wrong. So a layer might be all of the orientation you give your employees and the competencies they have to meet. That's a layer. A layer might be all of the technology you put in place and all of the computer systems you put in place that are, you know, the intent is that they will all help avert an error. It might be the budget could be a layer and how that budget is allocated to provide resources. So it's anything related to helping things to go the right way. Policies and procedures would be a layer. And what Reason's model reflects is that these layers all line up, but they all, it's any one point in time, if you look at one of the layers, have the tendency or the propensity or the potential for having a gap. For example, great new computer system put in place. Not everybody knows how to use it yet, or how to respond to it if it doesn't do what they were told it was going to do. That's a gap at that certain time with that person using it. Policy and procedures, a gap. 98% of the people in the hospital were oriented, educated on the new policy and procedure. It's Friday evening, and it just so happens that as a staff nurse who absolutely needs to do something related to that policy and procedure, never had any education on it. That's a gap at that certain point in time on a Friday night in that layer. So these layers, gaps can be there 1 minute and not another. But when they line up, all of a sudden you have something go wrong. And I have not been involved in any error investigation since 2000, and I have been involved in many first stories, second stories, and RCIs, root cause analysis investigations since then. Never have I been involved in one yet that there weren't gaps lined up or multiple things that contributed to something happening. So it just is always the case, even in the case of a poor performer like I mentioned, because if the poor performer is involved, they probably shouldn't have been there anyway. So, you know, what is management of poor performance? What's the system around that that wasn't falling into place? The other thing that the model, though, represents for me is, you can say one thing it is when the holes line up, that's when an error occurs, or that's looking back from an error, what you see. The other thing, the layers at any one point in time with their each layer's gaps, to me, taken just that without even looking at the error, that represents the complexity in that system. So at one point in time, this system has multiple characteristics and dynamism around it because it's constantly changing. And those layers, with whatever gaps are at that instant in time, is the complexity in that organization. So that, to me, is also what that represents. And it all can end up in an error, you know, when things align.